Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video, and of course, continuing on with the Superman review marathon. So that's right, guys. Well, you knew, obviously, what was coming next, and yeah, because, well, unfortunately, after the disastrous failures of, say, Superman's 3 and 4, and most prominently, the 4th Superman film, and at that time, because that would be the last Superman film we would see for quite a while, and with Superman 4 killing the original Superman film series, but, through various other Superman materials from shows, most prominently, through the 90s, and even to the early 2000s. Well, Warner Brothers attempt to make another Superman film, and they would manage to finally get another live-action Superman film to be made up to almost 20 years after the last live-action Superman film. And yep, in 2006, we got the triumphant return of the Man of Steel. Well, kind of, because, yeah, although it didn't do that bad, it wasn't the strongest comeback for the Man of Steel himself. So, yes, now I am finally reviewing from 2006, Superman Returns. Yes, Superman Returns. Yeah, like I said, this didn't turn out to be that bad, but it wasn't the strongest comeback that Warner Brothers was hoping for, for Superman to make his triumphant return to the big screen. And with Superman Returns being helmed by Bryan Singer, the cast members for this new Superman film, and seeing as how that Warner Brothers was starting to bring back some familiar hero icons from DC Comics, like most prominently Batman, and with Superman back to the big screen. Because yeah, a year before Superman Returns came out, we got the triumphant return of Batman, thanks to Christopher Nolan, with Batman Begins. So, yeah. And the first things I have to say about Superman Returns, well, I do remember when this had came out. I remember seeing some of the merchandise, and I think maybe I had, I want to say 1 or 2 Superman toys tied with Superman Returns, and but I don't think so, my family and I seen this in theaters. We might have, but yeah. But obviously, when it came out on DVD, yeah, I most prominently remember watching it on DVD. And I'm pretty sure that, yeah, 5-year-old me enjoyed Superman Returns. And fast forward, and me rewatching it at times, and with me rewatching it, and for the Superman review marathon, I gotta say, I enjoyed it, rewatching it once again, and for the Superman review marathon. I think what Superman Returns has to offer, and seeing as how Superman Returns is supposed to be connected and tied with the first Superman films, mainly the first 2, because Superman Returns ignores the events of Superman's 3 and 4, and it's very understandable why. And also, yeah, a bit of the Richard Donner cut is also canon with, Superman Returns, and with, the 2nd and 1st, with a few mentionings of the Donner cut. And, reusing the Superman theme and music that was written by John Williams, and the cast members for Superman Returns were some pretty good choices. And, the fact that Superman Returns is supposed to take place 5 years after Superman had left Earth, and even after the events of Superman 2. And, the reasons why he had left Earth for such a long time, well, it's understandable, and with what Superman explains at times in this movie. And, I think that, the way it was filmed and with its really cool visual effects and the costuming, the wardrobing, and, the sets and designs, the look of this film having a few good funny moments, some emotional moments, and really cool moments, and, like a few twists here and there, just, yeah. Having rewatched it again, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. And sure, yeah, it's not the best Superman film, and at that time, it wasn't the strongest, triumphant return for the Man of Steel, but overall, and at the same time, it's not as bad as it seems, okay? I'm sure as though that for all the cast members, Bryan Singer, they tried their very best to do a pretty good Superman film. And it was okay. It did turn out pretty good and entertaining, yeah. But again, it's a shame that it wasn't the biggest, strongest comeback for the Man of Steel, yeah. But yeah, just again, overall for me, I quite enjoy Superman Returns for what it is, yeah. Okay, so with the first things I've had to say about Superman Returns out of the way now, as always, for me, read the description / the story. While Lex Luthor plots to destroy him once and for all, the Man of Steel returns after a long absence to a much-changed world. Lois Lane has moved on with her life, and society has learned to survive without him. But yeah, that wouldn't last long. Not for them able to survive without him. Not what would come next in what goes on in this movie. Alright, so now with reading the description / the story out of the way, now, as I sometimes do, let's talk about some background. Well, as I did bring up from the start, where, yeah, after the disappointing failure of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, it killed the original Superman film series. Well, long story short, the rights to the Superman films were given back to the Salkinds, and it didn't take them that long to have in considerations to try to do a 5th Superman film, and with Christopher Reeve once again playing the titled character. And it seemed like things were going pretty well with whom they got to write a script for Superman 5, and it seemed to intrigue Reeve. However, at one point, Warner Brothers was interested in doing another Superman film, so with them acquiring back the film rights, and, with any consideration from Warner Brothers, if they had Christopher Reeve in mind for a new Superman film to once again play the title character, well, in 1995, as we all know, any attempt of Reeve to reprise the iconic character were totally lost forever. And, yeah, because, he had that fatal accident, and that was it. Yeah, but aside from that, Warner Brothers, throughout the 90s, they were really struggling trying to get a new Superman film made. And somehow, down the road, Jon Peters managed to acquire the film rights to Superman, and, well, Jon Peters' attempt to get a new Superman film underway, and, well, this starting off being called Superman Reborn, and when Kevin Smith was attached, he changed it from Reborn to Lives, and of course, yeah, then enter Nicolas Cage and Tim Burton, and, well, yeah, because all that attempt and work to try to get that Superman film made would not come to be, because, yeah, Warner Brothers pretty much axed it, yeah. And pretty much like, yeah, at a last-minute call, because they were going to very soon start working on this movie, roll camera, but yeah, Warner Brothers just axing it. And for the funds that were for the planned Superman film, where Cage would play the title character and Burton directing the Superman film, the funds going to Wild Wild West, but that being a whole other story, but yeah. And sometime later, yeah, Warner Brothers again attempting to get a new Superman film made. Like, at one point, there were considerations to do a Batman versus Superman film, and even Christian Bale was considered to either play Superman or Batman, and someone else playing either role. And Wolfgang Peterson would have been the director, but then J.J. Abrams at one point wrote a script for a solo Superman film, which would have been Superman Flyby. And, yeah, in fact, my dad most prominently telling me about the fact that Abrams was going to do a Superman film. And according to my dad, the script for Abrams' planned Superman film managed to get leaked, and once that happened, Abrams just flat out canceled it. But yeah, I mean, just overall, because with Abrams at the time attempting to make a new solo Superman film, and then, yeah, around that same time, enter Christian Bale, about to make a new solo Batman film. So Warner Brothers decided to cancel plans for a Batman versus Superman film in favor of, two solo films centering on those two characters. And unfortunately, Abrams' planned Superman film didn't go underway, and when Bryan Singer stepped in, and when Bryan Singer wanted to do his own version of Superman, and thus doing a Superman film that is canon and in connection with the first Superman films, most prominently 1 and 2, and ignoring the events of 3 and 4. Yeah. And Warner Brothers liking what Singer approached and proposed, for this new Superman film. So thus, with what Bryan Singer wanted to do for a Superman film, it was chosen, and thus it would then be underway. Yep, and, well, with Bryan Singer being attached to directing Superman Returns, well, this unfortunately caused him not to direct the third X-Men film, which being X-Men Last Stand. So, yeah. And in fact, because both of those films came out the same year, so... But, I think for what Bryan Singer had brought to him as the director for Superman Returns, not bad. And not to mention, the first two Superman films, inspired Bryan Singer to doing the X-Men films. The Superman films were a big inspiration for Singer doing the X-Men films, a big influence. So, yeah, very fitting. And, fitting because, that he would get to helm a Superman film of his very own. So, yeah. And yeah, because, that's pretty much all I've got for background. But, yeah. And also, yeah, some of the casting choices for this and, the previous original planned solo Superman film that Abrams would have done, a lot of big names that were considered for those characters from Superman, Lois Lane, and Lex Luthor, Perry White, like at one point, for Lex Luthor, Johnny Depp and Robert Downey Jr. were considered for Luthor. Imagine seeing either one of them as Luthor. That'd be interesting. Amy Adams tried to audition for Lois Lane. Predates to when she would actually get to play the role of Lois Lane. Even Henry Cavill, he was one of those, actors that auditioned for Superman. But, of course, yeah, he didn't get that until very later on for the next live-action Superman film. Even, say, Anthony Hopkins was at one point considered for Jor-El. Now, imagine that. Wouldn't that have been awesome? Imagine if there was a chance they couldn't use the likeness of Marlon Brando for Superman Returns, maybe possibly Anthony Hopkins would have been a good choice to play Jor-El in Superman Returns. But at the same time, yeah, it was great to see that, yeah, they did bring Marlon Brando back from the dead to once again reprise the role of Jor-El. But until I talk more about Brando returning as Jor-El for the film itself, even Hugh Laurie was at one point considered for Perry White, but because he was so committed to House, yeah, he could not participate, and whom would end up playing the role of Perry White in Superman Returns, well, until I mention him. Yeah, but, you know, just in the end, whom they got to be casted as those characters for Superman Returns, they were not bad choices. No siree. Yeah, and at least in my opinion. And yeah, because most prominently, you know, whom plays Clark Kent / Superman and Lois Lane, yeah, I'll talk about them when I get to them, okay? But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for background and with what I've had to say about background. Okay, so with background now out of the way, let's now dive into the film itself, shall we? Okay, so, well, you know, for the opening to this movie, well, a pretty good start because, yeah, the opening credits, in the exact same style as, yeah, the first two Superman films, and with the reuse of John Williams' music and score, the Superman theme, yep, excellent, and, yeah, and because, like, one of the first things we see after the pretty cool opening credits, well, because we see this, mansion, and, someone is, attending to this, dying old lady named Gertrude Vanderworth. I think I'm saying her last name right. Being played by the late Noel Nell. Yeah, I think I'm getting her last name right. She's talking with this gentleman, and we have no idea who it is at first, and apparently those outside of her room are knocking on the door because trying to warn Gertrude that this man cannot be trusted. And for anybody that wouldn't take them that long to realize whom it is that this lady's talking to. And sure enough, it happens to be Lex Luthor. Yeah, because Luthor getting Gertrude to sign the deed to her mansion, and for Luthor to acquire her mansion, all of her property. And, yeah, and Lex Luthor in Superman Returns being played by Kevin Spacey. Yeah, and say what you will about Kevin Spacey. I know, but there's no denying that, you know, for me, he's a fantastic actor. I enjoy Kevin Spacey as an actor, and I think with what he brought to the portrayal of Lex Luthor, the performance in Superman Returns, pretty good. Yeah, not to mention that Spacey was considered, before this, to play Luthor in the planned Superman film with Tim Burton and Nick Cage. And there's no doubt that he would have been good in that. And hey, it's great to see that that did end up becoming real, where, you know, Kevin Spacey would end up playing Lex Luthor. And yeah, just overall, he does an excellent job portraying Luthor and how this Luthor acts in this, and with what Luthor, in the events of this Superman film, is planning to do. Yeah. And yeah, because now Lex Luthor has acquired the rights to this old lady's mansion, and yeah, well, obviously with him acquiring the mansion, it's a part of what he's planning to do next, in this movie. But yeah, then, we then see, the Kent farm, yep, and in Smallville, and Martha Kent being played by Ava Marie Sant. If I might be mispronouncing her last name, again, you know me sometimes. Yeah, and, you know, a legendary actress, and some of the films that she did in her early acting career, like, you know, most prominently On the War Front, co-starring alongside with Jor-El himself, Marlon Brando, and also being in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. So, yeah, she was a pretty good choice, portraying Martha Kent, because, yeah, at one point Martha Kent, you know, outside of her kitchen window, seeing something land in the cornfield and, yeah, crop field and such, I should say. And it turns out to be a Kryptonian spaceship and such. Yeah, crystal ship. And yeah, her discovering and seeing that her adoptive son, Kal-El, Clark Kent / Superman, has made his return to Earth after 5 years. Yeah. And Clark Kent / Superman being played by Brendan Routh. Yeah. Now, yeah, Brendan Routh, in my opinion, I think he does a pretty good job at portraying Clark Kent slash Superman, and doing a pretty good job at him, doing an impression of Christopher Reeve, and that's what was intended, for his performance as, for Superman Returns, as the title character. And, especially since, just like Christopher Reeve, Brendan Routh wasn't a big name at that time. He had only done, say, some soap opera acting, but yeah, once he landed the title role of Superman, and what would come next for him? And not to mention that when it came to the CW, DC series, the shows of, the DC shows from CW, Brendan Routh would somehow reprise the role as Superman. And, once again, doing a pretty good job returning as that iconic character. But anyway, so, with Clark slash Superman having returned from Earth, and basically why he was away from Earth, throughout those 5 years, well, because he discovered, and from the astronomers, that, remains of Krypton were out in space, and Superman wanting to investigate this himself, and if anything had survived, anything that had, remained. But apparently what he discovered, and this isn't a deleted scene, in fact, this would have been the opening to this movie, where Superman, in his crystal ship, would find his way back to the system where Krypton once was, and, all he found there was pretty much just, nothing but a graveyard of Krypton. So, and of course, no survivors, for one thing. Especially. But and Superman spending some time, resting at the Kent farmhouse, and, because finding himself back in his old room and having a moment with the family dog. In fact, he has a flashback of his early childhood days and when he would discover his superpowers. 15-year-old Clark, as we see, being played by young Stephen Bender, because we see 15-year-old Clark running through the fields, jumping so high in the air, and when he, at one point, accidentally loses his balance, but he doesn't fall on the ground because, he hovers, he's floating, and, that's where he discovers that he can hover slash float. But that was really cool. A little bit of, seeing a young Clark Kent and when he, first discovers his powers. And a moment between, Clark and Martha, and with, Clark explaining what he found from Krypton, why he was away after all these years, and just, it's a pretty nice, touching moment from Clark and Martha, and seeing as how that, they hadn't seen each other since Clark first left Smallville, and when discovering the Fortress of Solitude, and from there on, and when he would make his way to Metropolis. And speaking of which, because, when we see Metropolis, Clark has made his way back to Metropolis and reinstated into the Daily Planet. And the only one that is happy to see him come back to the Daily Planet is Jimmy Olsen. And Jimmy Olsen literally being the only one that, has so much respect and careness for Clark. A little bit of Lois, Lois not intentionally, but still, and Jimmy Olsen being played by Sam Huntington. And Sam Huntington did a pretty good job at portraying Jimmy Olsen. And to go ahead and mention him, Perry White, whom not really that excited to see that Clark is back because, the only way Clark got back into the Daily Planet was, someone else whom, worked at the Daily Planet, but as it's stated by Perry and Jimmy, because, that employee passed away, and thus Clark taking that position to Scully. And Perry White, in Superman Returns, being played by good old Frank Langella. Yes, Frank Langella, a.k.a. the late 1970s Dracula, but he's done more than that. So a fantastic actor, Frank Langella. And his portrayal of Perry White in this, well, not bad either. He too did a pretty good job playing Perry White in this Superman film. And Clark, glad to be back in the Daily Planet, and not to mention that Jimmy surprised Clark with a cake, welcoming Clark back to Daily Planet. There was a piece missing from the cake. Well, Clark is wondering where Lois is, and, well, it turns out that Lois is doing a report. She's on an airplane for something to do where, apparently, this airplane that has a rocket ship attached up top of the airplane. And, the airplane with the rocket ship attached, basically, the rocket ship is going to launch soon. And, interesting, and what is in this Superman film. Anyways, but yeah. And Lois Lane in Superman Returns, being played by the lovely, talented Kate Bosworth. Yeah. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right specifically, because, again, you know me sometimes. And, yeah, Kate as Lois Lane, well, I thought she as well did pretty good as Lois Lane, because I know that some people, even Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, have said that, Brendan Routh and Kate Bosworth, they're too young to be playing Clark and Lois. And the fact that, the time and setting of Superman Returns is 5 years after the first two Superman films. Well, I mean, Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder were young when they did the first two Superman films, so I don't see the big deal. And just, having rewatched Superman Returns, each of their performances, not once did they bother me. And it didn't matter for me because, with how old they were when they did Superman Returns. Because I think in my opinion, they did a pretty good job portraying those two characters. Yeah, with Brendan Routh playing both Clark Kent and Superman, and, well, with Kate playing Lois Lane. Yeah. But yeah, so Lois not present at the Daily Planet, and Clark making a discovery at Lois's desk, where apparently she wrote this news report and such, for this newspaper, which being titled, "Why the World Doesn't Need Superman." Yeah, and this challenging the notion of his necessity and, making the suggestion that humanity can find its own strength and solutions. Well, not to mention that before Clark made his way back to Metropolis and being reinstated into the Daily Planet, he did see on the TV at the Kent house, on what had happened all throughout those 5 years and what the world was like, the catastrophic moments, the disastrous moments, because all that happening and Superman not being there to take care of all that. Well, it's not like, that he intentionally did this, just out of nowhere leaving Earth and not coming back after 5 years. But this, of course, upsets Clark/Superman with what he has discovered Lois has written and such, why the world doesn't need Superman. But if that's not enough for him, he also discovers that supposedly Lois is now a married woman with a son. But it is mentioned most prominently by Jimmy that Lois and this new guy in her life, they're not engaged. They're not married. In fact, Lois just dodging the whole thing of, if they're going to tie the knot and such. It's her business, and the same goes for her new man. Yeah. And seems as though that Lois is happy where she is within her relationship, and, well, because of the fact that her and her partner have a child together. Yeah. And then at one point, because, this happened earlier, where Lex Luthor, after coming back to him, now that he acquired this mansion, well, also getting his hands on this boat, obviously in connection with the old lady and the mansion that he bought, well, he takes the boat along with his goons, and his lady friend, Kitty Kowalski, I think I'm saying her last name right, being played by Parker Posey. I'd say Kitty, she was a pretty interesting character, and what goes through the character of Kitty, and, because moments with her where, because her dealing with Luthor's insanity, and because, Luthor being a sick, twisted human being, and with what he's planning to do in the events of this film, and at times where Kitty, is wondering if, she chose the right side, and, what can she really do? I mean, she can make the decision to do good, right? So But anyways, what Luthor does next, along with his henchmen and Kitty, and because Luthor's henchmen, there's Stanford, being played by Cal Penn. There's Brutus, being played by David Fabrizio, if I'm getting his last name right or wrong, Riley, being played by Ian Roberts, and Riley, he's always having, like, a video camera with him, and, finally, Grant, being played by Vincent Stone. So, as I said, with Luthor and his henchmen and Kitty all on this boat, making their way to the Arctic and discovering and locating the Fortress of Solitude. And, the look and design of the Fortress of Solitude in this, pretty cool. And with Luthor discovering these crystals, and Luthor mentioning that it feels like he had been, Kitty saying to Luthor that it looks like you've been here before, because, and as I said, because the Richard Donner cut being mentioned some in Superman Returns, so I take a guess probably Luthor obviously had no memory that he had been in the Fortress of Solitude after Superman reversed time, but, do the entire math on that for yourselves, but that would go for me, but But, back on point, because Luthor, inserting one of the crystals, and lo and behold, Luthor activates a recorded message of Jor-El, and because seeing Jor-El once again being played by the late legendary Marlon Brando. Brando being resurrected for this once more. And, it's really cool that, they managed to, have Jor-El be played by Marlon Brando once more, and, they got permission from his estate, and that would also lead to, for the Donner cut to use Brando's likeness. And with how the Donner cut turned out with, having Jor-El be in Superman 2 as was originally intended, it's awesome. And the fact that they had to, do some CG on Brando's head and to CG his mouth and lip to new dialogue, like, basically audio recordings of Jor-El that, we didn't see Brando say on screen as Jor-El. You get what I'm saying? And watching the behind the scenes of that, and actually that being one of the bonus features of its own on the DVD and Blu-ray of Superman Returns, it's really cool. And they pulled it off pretty good, even though the fact, because we don't see that much, because with how Jor-El looks on those crystals, but still, they did pretty good, and looking at the behind the scenes of it. And Luthor asking Jor-El, tell me everything about crystals, because, whatever Luthor has in plan for the use of crystals, and specifically, the crystals that come from Krypton, well, it's obviously not going to be a good sign. But coming back to, as was mentioned, where Lois is on an airplane, where, I think pretty much only the Daily Planet is covering this, for the news, where, an airplane is going to launch a rocket ship that's literally attached up above on this airplane. And, after Luthor had gained access to the crystals, and coming back to the mansion he acquired, and we did see this earlier, where there were these two Chihuahuas, I presume. And apparently there's only one that's still in the mansion. Even Kitty was wondering, weren't there two? What happened to the second one? Because The movie doesn't establish it, but do we even want to know? I have no idea. Anyways, but yeah, and eventually Kitty would adopt, the last remaining dog. So yeah, but yeah, Luthor and his henchmen and Kitty making their way down to the basement where there's this big model of Metropolis, and Luthor having his henchmen basically saw the tip of one of the Krypton crystals and to drop it in the water and so on, because yeah, Luthor gonna be testing something that has to do with the very tiny tip of one of the crystals. Yeah. And when that happens, in fact, yeah, because Stanford was holding that very tiny tip of one of those crystals, and a model train hit his hand. He dropped it in the water, and what would happen next? Well, the water would start bubbling. It does, and apparently it causes a blackout all over Metropolis, from, say, the Daily Planet, NASA monitoring, the spacecraft that's going to launch, that's attached to the airplane. The airplane loses power. All of Metropolis, if not the entire world, goes in a blackout. And yeah, thankfully this blackout doesn't last that long. But yeah, and with what we see happen next in the basement with this model of Metropolis, well, something starts to rise from the water, and yeah, it then starts to destroy most of the model of Metropolis. And this was interesting, where some screams from the tiny figures, we hear that, and yeah, so with that happening, in fact, Luthor stepped back from that. But with the blackout happening, but the power came back on, and yeah, especially for the airplane and with the spaceship on top of it, well, something does go wrong where, yeah, there's a malfunction, and, with them trying to aboard the launch of the rocket ship, but it doesn't oblige, and just overall something goes wrong, and yeah, the rocket's still attached to the airplane, being about to, blast off, but with the plane still attached, such as, yeah. And Clark, there was a moment where Clark and Jimmy, they went to this bar, and Bo, the bartender, being played by Jack Larson, yeah. Well, seeing this on the news, because with what was happening with the airplane that has the rocket ship, and Clark, of course, being aware of this, and yep, Clark gearing up in his Superman wardrobe. Yep, going from Clark Kent to Superman, and thus making his way to save the citizens as well as Lois Lane on the airplane. And yeah, that whole sequence where, yeah, Superman attempting to, save the people and Lois from being killed and destroyed from the airplane with the rocket attached. Well, eventually, the rocket is unattached from the plane, and it continues its way. But as for the plane itself, well, the tail end is burned, and it's about to fall down. And Superman trying to stop it and slow it down, and with the wings breaking off, and some of the people on the plane and Lois Lane catching a quick glimpse of Superman saving the day. And the plane, it's about to make its way right down in the smack of a baseball field, and, baseball stadium. And yeah, eventually, and obviously, Superman manages to stop the plane from crashing and to save all of the people and Lois Lane from dying with the plane crashing. Yeah. And well, this is where everybody, the whole world, sees that Superman has made his triumphant return, and Lois Lane, she's the only one that's really shocked by this. And yeah, because seeing as how she wrote that report, why the world doesn't need Superman and such, and her passing out like she did before in the first Superman film. Yeah, and the John Williams music playing, that was really cool. And yeah, because already the world and those in Metropolis, they've already and immediately have accepted Superman's return. All of them are cheering and applauding. So yeah, it's great to see that at that moment, everybody has accepted and missed Superman. Yeah. But Lois, well, not so much, because, yeah, with what we learn later from Lois and, with why she made that report, not to mention that her about to receive an award for what she had wrote, why the world doesn't need Superman. But yeah, and, back at the Daily Planet, because, eventually, Lois and Clark would reunite, and, because, with Clark also being absent for 5 years, besides Superman, well, apparently because Clark supposedly went on this, trip around the world or something, and with the mentioning of llamas, and if Clark met someone new in his life while he was gone for 5 years, and until he would come back to the Daily Planet. And a moment where Clark first meets Lois's son, Jason White, young Jason White being played by young Tristan Lake Lebu, if I'm saying his last name right, and whom Lois is seeing and whom is technically the father of Jason. Well, hence Jason's last name being White, well, that being Richard White, being played by good old James Marsden, aka Cyclops. And because seeing as how Bryan Singer and James Marsden had worked together because of the first 2 X-Men films. And the fact that for X-Men Last Stand, there wasn't that much of Cyclops in The Last Stand. So, it's nice to see that James still managed to be a part of the 3rd X-Men film, and at that time, it would be the last time he would play Cyclops, managing to do that, and and because the fact he's in a lot of Superman Returns. Okay, anyways, but so at the Daily Planet, well, Perry has everybody, the workers, to write, reports and such with Superman's return, writing the stories and such. Except for Lois. She wants to make a story all about the blackout, but Perry just dodging that and just, wanting for there to be stories written on Superman's return. As I said, because where Clark first meets Lois's son, then Richard, and Richard, whom also works at the Daily Planet, and also, with Jason, because, Jason, who, Clark did first meet. Well, Jason, one of the first things we discover about Jason is that he has an asthma inhaler, and, because of him wheezing, and he has to use it at times, when needed. And, Jason always being there at the Daily Planet with his parents, so, if it's not a bother to Perry and the others, then, and Jason behaving pretty good. And so, with Clark, getting to meet Lois's partner, Richard, and the son, Jason, well, and there was a moment where Superman actually visited, the house that Richard and Lois live in. They live right beside the ocean, and, well, the more we learn about Richard, he's a pilot, and he has his very own seaplane, and it's parked right outside in the back of the house. And Superman using his X-ray vision to see what's going on in the house, and I wouldn't say but to quote Marty McFly, he's a peeping Tom. Not really, but just he couldn't help himself with what he wanted to see, and because we see Jason playing piano. He's playing a little bit of Heart and Soul, I Fell in Love with You, da da da, that song, and hearing what Lois and Richard are saying, and when it's brought up that, Lois supposedly had feelings for Superman years ago, and, that report she made, an evening with Superman and such, and Richard asking Lois if, she had feelings for Superman and such, but even as of now, she doesn't, so, and with what Superman heard. And after that, well, Superman then flying in the sky and hearing the voice of his father, the dialogue of Jor-El, Marlon Brando that we heard from the first Superman film most prominently, there can be a great people, Kal-El, they wish to be. Yeah, that dialogue right there is just so good, and how Brando delivered it. And Superman up above Earth's orbit, the orbit of Earth, and hearing everything on Earth, if there's any trouble and such. And it just so happens there is this bank robbery that's happening, and Superman making his way there. And obviously, this has to do with Lex Luthor, where, some of his, crooks, I presume, well, I think it is them, where, one of them is literally using a machine gun on the police force, and, well, just in the nick of time, Superman managing to save the two policemen that were up top the roof of that building, and Superman dodging the bullets and, taking care of that. Meanwhile, Luthor and his goons, they're about to, infiltrate this, well, not really, just, they managed to show up 10 minutes before this exhibit museum closes, because Luthor is planning to retrieve something else, from this exhibit, a part of his plan, and with the crystals, and we see Kitty speeding down the line, she's losing control of the car in order to distract Superman from not having Superman go directly where Luthor is, and, Kitty, the brakes being loose and stuff like that, and literally they're broken, because, Luthor intentionally did that, and, now Kitty really is in peril, but luckily, Superman stepped in time, saving Kitty, and Kitty just trying to make a move on Superman, and just, my heart, send me to the hospital and such, and that's what he does, and dropping her off at the hospital, even right before he takes off, he has to get going. Kitty, telling Superman, maybe we can have a coffee sometime. Oh, that was pretty funny. And for Kitty, in order to distract Superman, but and Superman fell for it, having no idea, and with what Luthor was doing, and little did he know at first that Luthor had been released from prison, and it's obvious that Superman would know that Luthor, and of course, he isn't. He's up to no goods for what he's planning to do, and the fact that he now has, gained, the crystals of the Fortress of Solitude, and, with the experiment he did down in the basement of that giant model of Metropolis, and, with what happened and causing the blackout, these rock crystals rising from the model water, with what Luthor's planning to do, definitely not a good sign this time. And what Lex and his goons stole from that exhibit, well, was basically some kryptonite. And to go with with Luthor's experiment and what he's planning to do with the crystals, and now with the kryptonite. Anyways, so then, what happens next? And to speed things up some, well, Clark, back at the Daily Planet, is called in by Perry to cover the blackout, while Lois has to cover, the story, a story and such of Superman's return, and so on. And, well, Lois, she has no other choice but to obey what Perry wants her to do. So, And, with her, Richard, and Clark, as well as Jimmy, working extended hours at the Daily Planet, with what each of them are doing. And again, because Clark is covering the blackout, while, say, Lois and Richard, they're handling the stories of Superman and such with what Perry wanted. So, Also, a funny moment where, I feel like mentioning this, where, still, Jason, being not a problem at the Daily Planet, because he's just playing with himself, just, with a box in his head. Just thought I'd mention that, because that's pretty funny. Anyways, so, then what happens next with Lois? Actually, because there was a moment where Richard suggested that he, Jimmy, and Jason, they go out for some burritos. And yeah, Lois remaining at the Daily Planet, and at one point going on top of the rooftop of the Daily Planet to get some fresh air, and was about to smoke a cigarette, but Superman showing up, and yeah, this is where they fully reunite. They reunite properly, and besides, with all the press, and asking him questions when, yeah, they first reunited when he rescued her and the others on the plane, just, yeah, not a good time for them to reunite properly and have a conversation. And Lois, doing an interview with Superman, asking him why he left for 5 years, and with no trace and no goodbye note or anything like that, he just out of nowhere left Earth and didn't come back 5 years later. Well, and yeah, because he explains to Lois that the reason why he was absent for 5 years was because, yeah, when he discovered that remains of Krypton were out there in space, and he had to see this himself, but what he discovered, and as I mentioned earlier, nothing but a graveyard of what was left of Krypton. And Superman, he then asks Lois, and the reason with, meeting with Lois on top of the Daily Planet, just he really wants to know why she made that story with, why the world doesn't need Superman and such. And she explains to Superman that, after he left and never came back, she moved on with her life. And thus, having crossed paths with Richard White, Jason stepping into the picture, her son, and just, yeah, being done with Superman. And because, the fact that he just out of nowhere left. And just, when she eventually would write that story, why the world doesn't need Superman. And Superman, wanting to show and invite Lois to fly with him in the air and to show her something. And yeah, he convinces her, she takes off her shoes. She didn't before. Oh well. I don't know, I just feel like mentioning that quickly. But anyways, not a big deal. And thus, yeah. And in fact, because Lois did bring this up to Clark about Superman's absence, and Clark explaining that, probably, because, well, yeah, with what Clark specifically said, Clark seemed to make a good point, and the fact that, yeah, Clark is also Superman, and Superman, responding to Lois on Clark's comment that, probably Clark was right, and little does Lois know that, yeah, Superman and Clark are the same person. She did before, but the fact that, he reversed time and such, just, yeah, she doesn't remember now. Yeah, she has no idea that, Superman and Clark are the same person. Anyways, so, Superman flying Lois in the air and right above Earth, because Superman asking Lois if she can hear anything. She can't, but he can. And he makes it very clear to Lois that the world still needs him, because no matter what, there's always going to be paralleled situations, trouble, and stuff like that. So yeah, the world always needed Superman. Yeah, little did Lois really fully knew that. Yeah. And yeah, them flying back to the Daily Planet, and yeah, a romantic moment, I guess you could say. And I think probably better than, say, in the last live-action Superman film, The Quest for Peace. You know what I mean, just, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, in fact, because they're flying above the ocean, and Lois touching the water some, and yeah, them making their way back to the Daily Planet, and they were almost about to kiss, but Lois stopped herself because, yeah, because of her family, Richard and her son Jason, and, because, she's in love with Richard, and Richard's a good man, and Superman understanding, and yeah, just, yeah, that's how it is, and Lois, wondering if, they'll cross paths again, and Superman stating to Lois that he's always around. Of course he is, and yep, good night, Lois, and yeah, he flies off. And when Lois makes her way back down into the office, well, yeah, because We see Richard, Jimmy, and Jason eating some burritos, and Clark being there as well. Yeah. And he too, yeah, snacking on a burrito. And, they wonder where she was, and, her saying that she was up on the rooftop of the Daily Planet getting some fresh air, and Richard was, asked her, were you smoking? And she says no. Because, yeah, Superman stopping and preventing Lois from smoking. And, yeah, and that's important because, do not smoke. Anyways, yeah. Also, coming back to Luthor, because, in the meantime, Luthor's goons are preparing for what they're gonna do next with the crystals, and now that they've gained the kryptonite. And there was a moment where Kitty slapped Luthor in the face because with what Luthor intentionally did, taking off the brakes and such. But, yeah, Luthor had to let that happen because, really have Kitty be in peril, and for Superman to take the bait, to be distracted by that. But I can understand Kitty with her being upset by that because she had no idea what Luthor was actually planning for her to distract Superman while he and his goons were busy at that museum. So, that's Luthor for you because, how sick and twisted he is never fails. And because, from Gene Hackman to Kevin Spacey, excellent. Just keeping the way Luthor is, being sick and twisted, and his hatred for Superman, and taking down mankind, and him referring to himself as the greatest criminal mind of our time, Okay, continuing on, because what happens next? The next day, Superman, he goes to the Fortress of Solitude to get some advice from his father, Jor-El. But, that's when he discovers that the crystals have been taken. And, of course, Superman/Clark did learn about, Luthor being freed from prison, and how he was freed from prison and why it didn't take him that long to be released from prison would be explained later. And what happens next is Lois is about to attend to this award ceremony because, that has to do with that story she made, why the world doesn't need Superman, etc. But then, she at one point, she's also busy right now with the whole blackout report. And with what she discovers so far, and she was on a phone call and is going to supposedly meet with someone about the blackout, etc. But she at one point has to pick up her son from school, and with Jason tagging along with his mommy to where she's supposed to go, where it all began with Luthor at the mansion, and Lois noticing Luthor's yacht. Little does she know that she's about to reunite with Luthor, and Jason tagging along with her, and then making their way into the boat. And with what Lois discovers further in the boat, and even when most prominently discovering Luthor's wig collection, that definitely gives it away for Lois, and Lois attempting for her and her son to get off the boat, but it's too late. The boat has now sailed off, and Lois coming face to face with Luthor, who's in his bathrobe and he's brushing his teeth, and Jason making a comment that, you're bald. But so now, Lois and Jason are being held hostage by Luthor, and Luthor giving out the details as to why he was released from prison earlier, and what he's going to do this time. Because, because the fact that Superman had been absent during that time, no witness for Luthor, which being Superman, and hence, he managed to be released from prison earlier. Anyway, so with what Luthor is planning to do this time, really go at it. Basically, he explains that, the crystals that he had taken from the Fortress of Solitude, and also the fact that, he managed to get his hands once again on some kryptonite, and he's basically going to combine the kryptonite and the crystals to basically make this, this big land, this new continent, and in order to destroy Superman, and gonna take down countries and cause earthquakes. That's similar to what he was going to do in the first Superman film, where he was going to launch those missiles, cause earthquakes, have land of his own. So that's basically what he's going to do. But But with using alien technology, what came from Krypton with the crystals and kryptonite? Yeah. And also using some lead, because yeah, lead obviously being brought up in this film, and with the use of lead in this. And Lois at one point stating to Luthor that, Superman will take him down. And right there, and because somehow this became a meme for a while, where Luthor, in response to when Lois says that Superman will stop you and such, just Luthor out of nowhere shouting, "Wrong!" But the way that Kevin Spacey delivers it is so good, yeah. Because, yeah, Luthor being very serious on that, because he's gonna try and determine for Superman not to take him down. Anyways, just the landmass that Luthor is going to create and shoot into the ocean, and it's going to arise and crumble and tear apart Metropolis and other countries around the world. And, how well this goes. Luthor also mentions that, if any countries want to acquire some land of Luthor's, then yeah, and hoping that with the crystals and kryptonite to make a new empire and such. Yeah, Luthor going mad this time in this Superman flick. And at one point, Luthor showing off to Lois this cylinder that's made entirely of kryptonite. And the fact that he would use this cylinder, this kryptonite cylinder, to place one of the crystals to launch into the ocean a few minutes later. Because, yeah, when he shows off the kryptonite cylinder, he notices that Jason, Lois's son, is reacting to it. And this, it makes him very curious, and he gets close to Jason, and by putting it into his face. And even Lois denying this with, how Jason's reacting to it, where, Luthor thinks, and with Lois denying it, that maybe possibly Jason could be the son of Superman. Could it be? Well, we don't know just yet. Because, after that, telling his henchmen to keep an eye on them in the room, and while, he goes up aboard the ship, outside to launch the kryptonite cylinder with one of the crystals in it, and launching it into the ocean. And back at the Daily Planet, Richard, Clark, and Jimmy, and Perry, they have no idea where Lois is. They haven't heard from her. Richard did try calling up Lois earlier, but no response. And the fact that she left her phone in her car, and, and they're trying to find the location where Lois is, but they're having trouble at first, and when, the kryptonite cylinder with one of the crystals from the Fortress of Solitude is launched into the ocean, it starts to build up, and it's gonna cause mayhem, and thus, this causes another blackout at Metropolis, and, but the more it's gonna do in the ocean, oh boy. Meanwhile, inside the Luthor's yacht, Lois recommends Jason to play the piano, and Brutus, one of Luthor's henchmen, actually joins Jason playing the piano, piano duet, heart and soul, and with that happening, Lois, carefully and quietly tries to use a fax machine to reach out to those at the Daily Planet and giving them her coordinates where her and Jason are. But with the blackout happened, Lois having a bit of a struggle, trying to get it to work, and she realized that, Brutus, because we do see at one point he's not there right beside Jason at the piano, because, he did see what Lois was doing, he pulled the plug, and thus he, starts to beat Lois up and, about to attack her, and Jason, poor Jason, he's wheezing and seeing that his mommy's getting hurt. Well, out of nowhere, the piano launches straight to Brutus, killing him. And it turns out, when we cut back to Jason, he pushed it. He is the son of Superman. Now, don't tell me at that time, when the film came out, that was a surprising and awesome moment, right? Because, turns out that, Jason's not really the son of Richard. He's the son of Kal-El, Superman. And Lois being a bit surprised, and even Jason, it seems like he doesn't need his asthma inhaler anymore, but yeah. And then when Riley Riley and the other, Grant, sorry, yeah. Riley and Grant, they stepped in, they saw what happened, yeah. They're terrified, and yeah, they throw Lois and Jason in another room in this stall, and yeah, you can see the horrific look on Grant's face, and when Grant and Riley inform Luthor what happened with Brutus, and yeah, Brutus got hit by the piano, and Luthor, you can see in his face, he's like trying to figure this out. He's like, he has the oh shit look, because yeah, now he realizes that it's true. Jason is the son of Superman, and all that Luthor says, oh, it's time for us to go. And yeah, that's what they literally do. They pack up, they get in a chopper, and leaving behind Lois and Jason, because yeah, they're not safe around Jason, most notably. So yeah, they leave the yacht entirely, they abandon ship, getting on the chopper, leaving behind Lois and Jason, and eventually, and somehow, yeah, good thing that with Lois using the fax machine, sending out, a call for help to those at the Daily Planet. Somehow Jimmy discovered this and informing Richard and Clark about this, and yeah, thus they know exactly where Lois and Jason are. And Richard, because he can fly a plane, he's gonna head back home to fire up the seaplane, while Clark, yeah, he of course is gonna, go as Superman and go and rescue them. However, yeah, something else happens right as he was about to make his way to where Lois and Jason are, because yeah, with the cylinder, the kryptonite cylinder, with one of the crystals being in it, it's now making this landmass, well, and with the blackout having happened, and yeah, the cracks underneath the ocean are happening, and it's making its way directly to Metropolis. Yeah, Metropolis is soon to be in peril, and yeah, Superman, he has no choice but to, yeah, go and rescue Metropolis, and that's what he does. That entire sequence, like, everything that's happening in Metropolis kind of crumbling, but Superman being very quick to save all of Metropolis, with the pipes breaking, the fires erupting, the Daily Planet being destroyed some, the spinning globe, of Daily Planet, it broke off, but Superman saved that, and, Perry White, how he reacts to Superman having catched it, and, Great Caesar's ghost, like, yeah, good old Frank Langella, because again, he was good in this Superman film. They all were, just, yeah. I'm gonna probably say that again later. But yeah, just everything that's going on in Metropolis, with all the powers that Superman uses from his laser vision, blowing cool air, and taking out the flames, and fixing the pipes, the water leaking, saving those at the Daily Planet, anybody else that's in peril in Metropolis. Just fantastic. Don't tell me that was really awesome. Just that moment right there where Metropolis is starting to slowly but surely crumble, but Superman managing to save Metropolis and still keep it in one piece. And after that, Superman, yeah, well, obviously, he's going to make his way where Lois and Jason are. And, yeah, Lois and Jason's still stuck in that one room where, it's kind of like kitchen appliances or something, Even Lois asked her son if, he can help Mommy open the door, but, Jason, saying that he's sorry and, it's all good. And even Jason did at one point, a little later, tried to open the door himself, but actually, right as he was about to open it, Richard showed up. So yeah, Richard got there first, and obviously, Richard saving Lois and Jason. They tried to get out of the boat, but yeah, they're too late for that because, the landmass that, of the combination of the kryptonite crystals and the krypton crystals and the kryptonite, arising from the ocean, spikes, and one of them going straight through the yacht. And yeah, this is where the yacht starts to break apart. Lois, Richard, and Jason trapped in the boat. They tried to open one of the doors, but yeah, even when Lois got knocked out by the door she tried to open, now she's unconscious, and yeah, only Richard and Jason are the only ones that just golly, they're really in peril right here. But of course, obviously, yes, just in the nick of time, Superman stepping in, saving all three of them, and getting them to Richard's seaplane. Yep, so, and Superman using his X-ray vision to see if Lois is okay. And she is, and yep, Richard thanking Superman, and so on, just, yeah. And thus, Richard, Lois, and Jason, they're going to get out of there, while Superman, he's got this from here, going to take care and come face-to-face with Luthor once again. Yeah, and by the way, because, yeah, we then finally see Superman and Luthor come face-to-face. You know, they didn't cross paths all throughout this movie until now, because, yeah, up to the climax and the third act of the film, and by this point, we've made it up to 2 hours into the film, but, you know, it's just one of those things. But, yeah, so Superman making his way to where Luthor is, and, yeah, Superman coming face-to-face with Luthor, the dialogue and conversations each of them have, and, well, Luthor managing to take down Superman just like that. And seeing as how that Superman is surrounded entirely by kryptonite. Again, with the combination of the crystals from the Fortress of Solitude with kryptonite. Yeah, and of course, kryptonite being a big weakness for Superman, and yeah, because there's a lot of kryptonite around him, yeah, he does not stand a chance this time to Luthor. And even, yeah, from, say, yeah, Riley, Grant, you know, them beating up Superman, and, yeah, and also, Stanford, yeah. You know, I didn't say that much about Luthor's henchmen. You know, his henchmen from Stanford, Brutus, Riley, and Grant, they were pretty good henchmen, yeah. Also, to name some of the other cast members, because, yeah, James Karen, he played Ben Hubbard, if I'm saying the last name right or wrong, only in the deleted scenes, yeah. Also, there was Peta Wilson, she played Bobby Fay, Gil being played by Jeff Truman, Polly played by Barbara Angel, Shuttle Commander being played by Ian Bliss, Shuttle Pilot being played by Anusa Nathan, if I'm saying that right, and, oh yeah, and because, Richard Branson and his son Sam Branson, because they worked on Superman Returns for some of the effects, and in return they got to cameo as the shuttle guys in the spaceship, yeah, on top of the airplane. Richard played the shuttle engineer, and Sam played the shuttle specialist, yeah. Also, Warwick Young, he plays 777 co-pilot, and Brad Buckley plays 777 navigator. Mission Control Flight Director, played by Bill Young. Mission Control Navigator, played by Thomas Stewart. Mission Control Officer, David Webb. Museum Guard, Patricia Howson. Vanderwerf, relative, played by Maureen Lee. Vanderwolf, the two other relatives, they were played by Steve Ostro and Hank Roberts, and a little girl whom Luthor gave his wig piece to her, and she screamed. That was young Jordana Betty. I think I'm saying her full name right. And, and those that are in this hospital that we see very later in the film, I'll get to them shortly. But, because, back on point, because, Superman not standing a chance towards Luthor and his goons, and, Luthor and his goons beating up Superman, and Superman tumbling, and when Luthor starts to stab Superman with a piece of kryptonite, and it's in his body, literally, and Superman, he tries to stand up to, confront Luthor, but, he falls and lands into the ocean, and, him being in peril, not able to, heal up and fly because of the kryptonite in him, and hearing the voice of Jor-El once more, and, Then, Lois, she regained consciousness, and wondered what all has happened, because she now sees herself in the seaplane, and, Richard and Jason telling her that, Superman came in, and, Lois then telling Richard that they have to go back, because Superman is more likely in trouble, and he won't stand a chance. The fact that, yeah, kryptonite is right there and such. Just, yeah. And Richard obliging, and thus they go back to help and save Superman. And when they try to locate and find Superman, well, Jason, noticing Superman in the ocean, spotting him, and thus they go down there. Lois jumps in the ocean, saving Superman, getting him in the seaplane, and Lois removing the piece of kryptonite from his body. And yeah, Superman, all better, he thanks them, and thus he has to leave and take care of what Luthor has created once and for all, disposing it. He flies up where the sun is to recharge. Yeah, because keep in mind, he has to recharge with the use of the sun. So once that's done, he then goes underwater and starts to rise the landmass that Luthor has made with the combination of the Fortress of Solitude crystals and the kryptonite. Yeah, and because kryptonite is Superman's weakness, you know, he's got to do it. He's got to do this, or yeah, the world is in peril. And Luthor and his henchmen and Kitty, them feeling the landmass rumbling and shaking, because yeah, them discovering that Superman is back and he's all right and is going to dispose where they're at, you know, the landmass. And thus, Luthor telling them to get the heck out of there, pack up what they need to get, and yeah, of course, you know, some of Luthor's goons trying to get all the money they can, while Luthor, on the other hand, he especially collects those crystals from the Fortress of Solitude. Unfortunately, when they're making their way to the chopper, all of Lex Luthor's goons, besides Kitty, they don't survive. They get crushed, literally. So that's the end of the remaining goons of Luthor. Yeah, that's a shame, because poor Stanford, Riley, and Grant, they just get freaking crushed, and that's the end of them. And all that remains is Luthor and Kitty, as well as one of those puppies that Kitty has. And thus, them getting in the chopper, Luthor has Kitty hold on to the crystals, but at that moment, Kitty technically redeems herself, does the right thing, opens the chopper door and disposing the crystals. She did do the right thing. Yep, a bit of redemption right there for her. Because, you know, as I said earlier, there are times, and very later on in the movie, where we can see in the look of Kitty's face, she's not having a good time being with Luthor and what he's doing. Especially, she did shed a tear when she was witnessing Superman get beat up. So, yeah. And her moment where she disposed the Fortress of Solitude crystals once and for all, and yeah. And Luthor, you know, just, what did you do to them? I'm sorry, yeah. Well, I mean, at least Luthor spared her and where we would see them next. But yeah, so them escaping the landmass, and yeah, what happens next is Superman lifting the landmass, what Luthor had created with the combination of the crystals of the Fortress of Solitude and kryptonite, lifting it into the sky and up into space with all his might and strength, and throwing it into space, and after that, he passes out. He then starts to fall back down to Earth, and yep, everybody at Metropolis witnessing him falling and into the main Central Park of Metropolis. And what happens next is he's taken directly to the Metropolis Hospital. Yep. And man, because some of the doctors and nurses trying to use their instruments on Superman, well, because yeah, them being made of metal and such, yeah, they can't get into his skin or anything, because yeah, just them breaking off, or when they, you know, do the clear, like, yeah, that causes everything to spark, you know. And yeah, and it's believed at first, in fact, the Daily Planet had one newspaper and another, each of them different, to be ready and prepared to be published. One that says Superman is dead, and the other saying Superman lives, because, you know, they just got to be prepared. And Richard checking on Lois, whom is upset by this, you know, because thinking that Superman has died and such. In fact, you know, it's recommended that, yeah, because Lois going to the hospital to meet with Superman, and she manages to get into the hospital because, Richard making it very clear to her that you're Lois Lane, and because Lois Lane having such a huge connection with Superman, the citizens of Metropolis knowing about this. So both her and her son Jason going into the hospital to see Superman, who is still unconscious and in a coma. It's then discovered that, of course, Superman didn't die. He's just in a coma. And Lois having a conversation with Superman, and if he can hear Lois. And at one point she whispers something into Superman's ear, and I think it's obvious what it is that she whispered, where, basically, Lois does reveal to Superman that Jason is his son. And Jason was checking out Superman's wardrobe that was taken off of him, his suit. And then Lois does give Superman a kiss on the lips, and right before they leave the hospital room, very sweet of Jason, he kisses Superman on the forehead. That was very sweet and cute of him. So after that, because the doctors and nurses, to go ahead and mention them too, because the rest of the cast members, hospital ward nurse being played by Karina Bracken, hospital nurse being played by Raleigh Hill, if I'm saying the first name right, two doctors played by Lee James and Michael Duggan, and a few others. There was Boy with Camera being played by Keegan Joyce, because when Superman saved Kitty, when she was in peril in that car, this boy with a camera took really good pictures of Superman. And as for Jimmy, well, because Jimmy struggling trying to take a really good picture of Superman, he eventually did get plenty of good pictures of Superman when he saved the Daily Planet spinning globe. So that was a good moment for Jimmy right there. Also, some of the anchors, like French news anchor being played by Frederique Fouch, if I even said her full name right. Again, you know me sometimes. German anchor being played by Julian Pulvermacher, if I'm saying that right. Rebecca Barrett, she's the German reporter, the female German reporter. Sydney reporter being played by Penelope Heath. And news anchor number 1, Ted Maynard. Anchor number 2, Ed Whitman. Number 3, Pure Lawerne. Number 4 being Paul Shedlockwich, and number 5 being Barry Quinn. So just name some of the other cast members of this movie, but back to where I was, because what happens next, because when we see Luthor and Kitty once more, because, we see them stuck on this very small island, this tiny / small island, because, they didn't manage to make it back, at least to Metropolis or something. So they're stranded on this tiny island. The gas ran out on the chopper, and there's not that much for them to eat on the island, and so, with what Luthor was throwing into the ocean because of his anger. And Kitty, to asking Luthor, what are we going to find to eat? And Luthor has his eyes on the dog, but if Luthor managed to have that dog be cooked, because we don't know what happens after that, saying, that's the defeat and demise of Luthor. At least he was spared, as he is, where this time he's stranded on a tiny island with Kitty. So, well, he had it coming, so anyways. So after that, well, the movie's soon coming to an end, where, at one point, the nurses and doctors and a security guard discover that Superman left his hospital room, and if it's obvious to them already that Superman did heal up. Also, there was a moment where when Lois and Jason left the hospital and the news reporters were interviewing Lois, well, Martha happened to be there. So it's nice to see that we got to see Martha once more, and her being aware that, because her son is okay, and it was nice to see her once more in the movie. But the ending to the movie, because what happens next is, Lois was actually going to write a news story about Superman, but she couldn't find herself doing it, and she even shed a tear. And, well, in Jason's bedroom, Superman visits Jason, and because, yeah, now that he knows that Jason is his son, and the dialogue that he says directly to Jason, and yeah, the father becomes the son, and the son becomes the father, and the father becomes the son. Yeah, that whole thing. Superman left his bedroom. Jason woke up to when he whooshed away, and Lois, she stepped outside for a moment to smoke, but yeah, she then stopped herself, yeah, because she realized that, she shouldn't be smoking anymore, and that's good. And Jason saying, goodbye, because yeah, and he's calling out directly to Superman, and she sees Superman right there, hovering, and once again, Lois asking Superman if we'll ever see each other again, and Superman once again stating to Lois that I'm always around, and of course he is. This time he is. He's not going anywhere. That's good to see. And yep, Superman saying goodnight to Lois, and yep, he flies off, and yep, the last shots we see of Brendan Routh as Superman flying, there was one shot where, yeah, it's a CG version of Brendan Routh as Superman flying around the clouds. Why couldn't they get Brendan Routh to do that? Because the very last shot is where, yeah, Superman is flying in space over Earth's orbit. And yeah, he smiles for the camera. That's Brendan Routh, but I don't know, beats me. Also, yeah, during the end credits, there's a very sweet dedication to Christopher and Dana Reeve, because yeah, both of them having sadly passed away while Superman Returns was in production, and yeah, Dana especially having died the year Superman Returns came out. But yeah, that was great, and rightfully so that both Christopher and Dana, they are dedicated in Superman Returns. Yeah, that's great to see. But yeah, Superman Returns. Again, I quite enjoyed this. Having done a rewatch, and yeah, with the Superman review marathon, it's not as bad as it seems, at least in my opinion. And again, as I said before, it wasn't the strongest comeback for Superman. It's unfortunate, but that's not to say it's god-awful. What Superman Returns had to offer, with its storyline, its plot, was actually pretty good and interesting. Yeah, and the fact that Superman Returns, like I also said, it's supposed to be in connection with the first two Superman films, Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner, and ignoring the events of 3 and 4. Yeah, that was pretty good. And paying homage to that Superman, and because yeah, it is supposed to be canon to yeah, the first two Superman films. Yeah, just everything from beginning to end, the story, the characters, and those that betray these characters in this Superman film. Yeah, just great talents that were in this film, and none of them disappointed, in my opinion. They did their very best. From Brendan Routh, Kate Bosworth, Kevin Spacey, James Marsden, Parker Posey, Frank Langella, Sam Huntington, Eve Marie Saint, Marlon Brando being resurrected once again for Jor-El, Cal Penn, Ian Roberts, and yeah, Tristan Lake LeBeau as Jason White. All of the cast members for Superman Returns were excellent. The music and score, the reuse of John Williams' music and such from Superman, and of course with the Superman theme, once again, and rightfully so, being used for this. The look and design for Superman Returns, the costume and wardrobe, and yeah, because, yeah, say what you will about Brendan Routh's Superman suit, I don't think it was that bad looking. Sure, maybe the symbol on his chest could have been a bit bigger, and maybe the boots could have been a bit small or something, and the same goes for the cape, but the cape and boots didn't bother me. I thought they were okay, and I don't... does it seem okay that maybe Superman's cape should be a little long? And the same would go for Batman. I'm just simply saying. And yeah, because with really awesome visual effects, the flying shots, just everything that was done for Superman Returns. Bryan Singer being the director of this, just, yeah. And even though this wasn't the strongest comeback for Superman, it still turned out okay. Yeah, just overall, I enjoyed Superman Returns. I don't think it's that bad. It's pretty decent, and it's okay. Yeah, and I'm sure the same would go for some of you. And I'm giving Superman Returns, well, why not? 7 out of 10 stars. Yes, 7 out of 10 stars for Superman Returns. And what about you guys? What did you think of Superman Returns itself? Any of you that actually like and enjoy Superman Returns for what it is? Any of you, like me, remember the time when this was coming out? Any of you that got to experience this in theaters? And if you have any favorite moments from this Superman film, and if you thought the entire cast was pretty good, it had some good visual effects, some awesome climactic moments, and with the flying shots, the reveal of Superman's son, if you have any favorite lines and quote of dialogue, and with them resurrecting Marlon Brando for this, to be Jor-El once more, and, if this would be one of your top favorite Supermans, just, point being is that if some of you do enjoy and like Superman Returns, but just, yeah, overall, what do you think of Superman Returns itself with what I've had to say, my review, and yeah, what did you think of my review? Leave comments and give this review video a like as always. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of Superman Returns. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward. And I will see you guys in the next video / review. And, well, continuing on with the Superman Review Marathon, stay tuned later tonight, because what I will be reviewing next is actually, this time, going to be an animated Superman film. And let's just say that Doomsday is in the title. And not to mention, this did come out 1 year after Superman Returns. Yeah, I'm sure you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Just, yeah, again, stay tuned for that. Continuing on with the Superman Review Marathon. Take care, and peace out.